I never thought a Monday morning would turn into a day I'd remember for the rest of my life. The sun was rising over my ranch, painting the fields gold, and everything looked peaceful. My kids were chasing chickens, my wife was humming while watering the garden, and for a moment, life felt perfect. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the quiet. This ranch wasn't just land, it was our sanctuary. Every fence, every barn, every corner of this property held memories of laughter, late-night talks under the stars, and simple family dinners. But I had learned the hard way that peace on a ranch doesn't last long when the HOA is involved. That's when I saw him, Gary, a knock on the gate. Sharp, deliberate, not a delivery or neighborly hello, but a statement. I recognized him immediately. Middle-aged, power-hungry, the kind of man who could make you feel guilty for planting sunflowers. Morning, I called, trying to keep it casuals. He didn't smile. Leaning on his SUV, the one plastered with the HOA logo like a badge of authority, he just said, "Morning." His voice was flat, calm, and somehow cold. "Some neighbors have concerns." I forced a smile. Concerns about what? He tilted his head. "About your property, your changes, your visibility." I blinked. Visibility. "Yes," he said slowly, letting the word hang. "Some of us are concerned about how you and your family influence others. Rules aren't just about fences and barns, sometimes it's about people." My stomach sank. Something about the way he said it made the hair on my arms stand up. I had dealt with HOA rules before: color of barns, landscaping, minor fines, but this felt different, personal, targeted. "I'm just living my life," I said cautiously, "following every rule." He didn't move. "Rules are relative," he said. "Boundaries matter, and some lines should never be crossed." I stared at him, trying to read his meaning, but the look in his eyes sent a shiver down my spine. He was testing me, testing how far he could push. My kids were behind me, laughing and playing, completely unaware of the tension building. My wife glanced at me, sensing something but not knowing what. "Gary," I said, voice firm, "you need to leave now." He tilted his head again, the tiniest smirk forming. "Do you think that's wise? You might regret it." That's when I realized he wasn't here to lecture about permits or rules. He was here to intimidate my family. And that, I decided in that moment, was a line I wouldn't let him cross. He lingered a second longer, then walked back to his car. The threat hung in the air like smoke. I could feel it in my bones. That morning wasn't just a visit, it was a warning, a promise, and deep down I knew it wasn't over. That night, sleep didn't come. I checked the locks, peered through the windows, and made sure my family was safe. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind made me tense. Gary had crossed a line, and I was ready to stand my ground. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The calm I had cherished on that porch was gone, and tomorrow Gary would come back. I woke up the next morning with a knot in my stomach. The sunrise no longer felt comforting, it felt like a warning. I tried to shake it off as I walked outside, but my eyes kept darting to the driveway. Sure enough, there was Gary's SUV, parked just beyond the gate like a silent predator waiting for the right moment. My kids were still playing, oblivious, and my wife was on the porch sipping her coffee. I gave her a small nod, a silent warning to stay alert. This wasn't going to be another gentle HOA discussion. Gary had crossed the line yesterday, and now I knew he had come back with a purpose. He didn't even knock this time. He strolled onto my property as if he owned the place, his HOA badge glinting in the sunlight. "Morning," he said, almost casually, like we were old friends meeting for coffee, but the chill in his voice betrayed his intentions. "Gary, you're trespassing," I said firmly, stepping forward. He laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was the kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl. "Trespassing? Oh, I don't think so. I'm making sure the neighborhood remains orderly, and part of that responsibility includes supervision." I clenched my fists. There it was, the veiled threat. He wasn't just watching property lines, he was watching us. "You need to leave," I said again, louder this time. My voice had an edge that made even me flinch. He tilted his head, eyes scanning my family, lingering a second too long. "You know," he said slowly, "sometimes people think rules are optional, sometimes families need guidance. I just want to make sure everyone here behaves appropriately." That was it, he had finally said it outright. My family, my wife and kids, were the problem in his eyes. I felt anger bubbling inside me, but also a protective instinct so strong it almost hurt. I stepped closer, putting myself between Gary and my family. "I don't take kindly to threats," I said, keeping my voice low but dangerous. "You will leave my property right now, or I'll make sure law enforcement handles this." His eyes narrowed and he smirked. Law enforcement? Are you serious? This isn't the Wild West. This is a community, a place where rules exist, and sometimes people need to learn consequences. I realized then he wasn't bluffing. He had a plan. He had probably rehearsed this in his head, imagining me flinching, imagining my wife or kids intimidated, but I wasn't going to let him win. Not today. Consequences, I repeated, voice steady. Let me make it very clear, I don't respond to threats. You are on private property, you are threatening my family, this ends now. He chuckled, the kind of laugh that made my blood boil. You'll see someday that resistance has a price. Something inside me snapped, not in anger but in clarity. I wasn't just defending my property, I was defending the people I loved most in this world. My kids were laughing, unaware, and my wife gave me a subtle nod. She trusted me to handle this, and I wouldn't let her down. Gary, I said, taking another step forward, leave or I call the sheriff, and trust me, this time I won't ask twice. He paused as if weighing his options. Then, without another word, he walked back toward his SUV, his eyes still glinting with malice. But I could tell he wasn't done. This was just the opening move in a game he thought he controlled. I watched him leave, and for a moment relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I knew he'd be back, and next time it wouldn't just be words. I could feel it in the way he looked at my family, in the way he lingered on the porch for a fraction too long. That night I didn't sleep. I paced, checking every window, every lock. I went over strategies in my head, imagining every possible scenario. My kids were safe in their beds, but Gary's words echoed in my mind. Resistance has a price. I promised myself, no matter what it took, I would make sure my family stayed safe. And I would make sure Gary understood in no uncertain terms that he had picked the wrong family to threaten. Tomorrow I realized things would escalate and I had to be ready. The next morning I woke to a silence that felt heavier than usual. The kind of silence that warns you something is coming. I glanced out the window at the driveway, half expecting to see Gary's SUV parked there again. But this time it wasn't him. No, it was something worse, an envelope, plain and white, lying neatly on our porch. I picked it up, my gut twisting. Inside was a letter typed on HOA letterhead, but it wasn't just another complaint. It was a warning, a veiled threat. Your property changes are unacceptable. Continued disregard for HOA guidelines may result in consequences that affect your family directly. I felt my blood run cold. Consequences that affect my family? I muttered, my voice trembling with disbelief and anger. That was it. He had crossed the line from nuisance to menace. This was no longer about fences, barns, or landscaping. This was personal. My wife noticed my pale face immediately. What is it? She asked, concern flashing in her eyes. I showed her the letter, and for a moment she looked stunned. Then a flicker of fear crossed her features. They're serious, she whispered. They're threatening us. I knew she was right. Gary had spent months building influence in the HOA, subtly manipulating neighbors and creating fear. And now he was daring us to respond. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me panic. That day, I made sure the kids stayed close. I sent them outside, but only under my watchful eye. Every time I heard a car door slam, my heart jumped. Every unexpected sound made me tense. I realized Gary wasn't just targeting me, he was trying to unsettle my entire family, make us doubt our safety. By mid-afternoon, the tension reached its peak. I was checking the perimeter of the ranch when I noticed a figure at the edge of the property line. A man I didn't recognize, standing too close to the fence, watching the kids play. My heart skipped a beat. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't speak, just stood there. I grabbed my phone and dialed my wife. Keep the kids inside, lock the doors, don't come near the fence. The man lingered a few moments longer, then finally walked away, but the message was clear. This wasn't a coincidence. Gary was sending signals, testing my limits. I could feel my protective instincts flare. My family's safety was no longer negotiable. That evening, Gary himself appeared at the gate, unannounced. My kids were inside, but my wife was watering the garden, oblivious to the tension building. I stepped in front of her. Stay back, I said quietly. Gary's eyes flicked to my family, and I felt the cold weight of his stare. You think letters and warnings are enough? He asked, his voice smooth but deadly. You're lucky we're civilized. Some families learn the hard way. I could feel my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. This ends now, Gary. You will leave my property. You will stop threatening my family, or I call the authorities and I will make sure every move you make is documented. He smirked. Document all you want. Some lessons can't be recorded, they must be felt. My wife finally stepped closer, sensing the danger. "Gary," she said firmly, "you have no right, stay away from us." His smirk faltered, but only slightly. He turned slowly, pausing just long enough to let me know this wasn't over. Then, as always, he walked away, leaving an ominous silence behind. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat on the porch, watching the moonlight fall on my property, my mind racing. Gary's words, his presence, the anonymous figure at the fence, everything pointed to the same conclusion: this was escalating, and the next move wouldn't just be intimidation. I realized I had a choice. I could let fear dictate our lives, retreat behind closed doors and hope it ends, or I could prepare, reinforce, and protect my family at all costs. There was no middle ground. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, but so did determination. Gary had no idea who he was dealing with, and I would make sure he regretted ever threatening my family. Tomorrow, I promised myself I would take the first step towards standing my ground, and I knew, once I did, there would be no turning back. By the next morning, there was no denying it, Gary wasn't going to stop. The letters, the threats, the men lurking at the fence, it all pointed to one thing: he wanted to push me to intimidate my family, and I wasn't going to let him, not now, not ever. I started by walking the perimeter of the ranch, inspecting every fence post, every gate latch, every corner where someone could hide. My boots sank slightly into the dirt as I moved, but my mind was fully alert. I needed to think ahead. Every move Gary made had been calculated, and now it was my turn. My wife joined me on the porch, her expression a mix of worry and determination. "You look like you're preparing for war," she said, attempting a small smile. I couldn't help but grin, a little humor to cut the tension. "Welcome to war," I said lightly, though inside I was deadly serious. "And this time, we're not backing down." We started small, reinforcing the gates, installing extra locks, and adding cameras in corners that had previously gone unnoticed. I even rigged a few motion sensors near the property line. Every precaution was designed not to threaten anyone, but to make it impossible for someone to approach unnoticed. My kids, curious as always, asked why I was dragging boxes of equipment and tools across the yard. "It's just a game," I told them, trying to keep my tone light. "Daddy, building a secret fort." Their giggles made me smile, but it also reminded me why I couldn't fail. Gary wasn't just threatening property, he was threatening their innocence, their safety. While we worked, I made a plan. I had to cover every angle: legal, physical, and psychological. I called a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. I went over the letters and notes, making sure we had documentation of every threat, every encounter. This wasn't just about fighting back, it was about proving a pattern, about ensuring that if Gary pushed too far, there would be consequences he couldn't ignore. By afternoon, I was exhausted, but the adrenaline didn't let me stop. I walked through the ranch again, imagining every possible scenario. What if Gary tried to confront me directly? What if someone came onto the property to intimidate my family while I wasn't there? I mentally rehearsed responses, every word, every action carefully considered. Even as I prepared, a small part of me had to laugh at the absurdity. Here I was, a rancher, preparing for what felt like a battle against a HOA member over rules and boundaries. Only it wasn't just rules anymore, it was our family, our home, our lives. And in that light, humor was just a way to keep my mind sane. As night fell, I checked on the kids, making sure doors were locked and windows secured. My wife was in the kitchen, quietly preparing dinner, trying to maintain normalcy. I knew she was just as tense as I was, maybe more, but we had to show strength for each other and for the kids. I sat on the porch, looking out over the fields, and made a decision. Gary wanted a reaction, he wanted fear. Well, I wasn't giving it to him, not fear, not hesitation, not doubt. Tomorrow I would confront him, not recklessly, but with preparation, with clarity. And I would make sure he knew, in no uncertain terms, that he could not threaten my family without facing the consequences. The stars were out now, twinkling over our ranch. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet of the night settle over me. This calm was temporary, I knew. Gary's next move would come soon, and when it did, I had to be ready. I promised myself one thing that night: no threats would go unanswered. No intimidation would succeed. And when Gary finally realized what we were capable of, he would regret ever thinking my family was an easy target. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. I woke up before dawn, the ranch bathed in a faint gray light. There was a weight in the air, a tension that pressed against my chest like a physical force. I knew today was different. I could feel it in my bones. Gary wasn't just going to threaten us from a distance anymore. He was coming onto my property, and this time I had to be ready. I went over my plan one last time, cameras armed, sensors activated, every gate and fence checked. My kids were still asleep, my wife beside me, unaware of the storm about to hit. I didn't want to alarm them yet, I needed focus, control. And then I saw him. Gary's SUV rolled slowly down the driveway, his eyes scanning, calculating like a predator. My heart thumped, but I didn't flinch. I stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, and waited. "Morning," I said, my voice steady, not friendly, not joking, steady. He stepped out of the SUV and smiled, that same cold, sharp smile that always made my skin crawl. "Morning," he replied, his tone deceptively calm. "You ready for a little conversation?" I could feel the tension radiating off him. This wasn't a chat, it was a challenge. I took a deep breath, planting my feet firmly. "You're on private property. If you don't leave, I'm calling the sheriff." He tilted his head, clearly amused. "Oh, I'm aware, but I think we both know it won't come to that unless you force it." I narrowed my eyes. "I've forced nothing yet, Gary, but I will if you threaten my family. Step back." He took another step forward, encroaching, testing the boundary. "You really think all this preparation, fences, cameras, locks, will stop me?" "Try me," I said, my voice low, unshakable. "You don't scare me, you don't scare my family." He smirked, scanning the property like he was already planning his next move. Bold words, "I hope your confidence lasts." Then it happened. One of my kids appeared at the porch, curious about the voices. My protective instincts went into overdrive. "Inside," I barked, pointing firmly. "Now." The kid obeyed instantly, and my wife followed, eyes wide with concern. Gary's smile faltered slightly. He realized this wasn't just a negotiation anymore. This was serious. I could see it in the way he hesitated, weighing his options. "I see you've prepared," he said, trying to regain composure. "Cameras, sensors, clever, but sometimes preparation isn't enough." I stepped closer, matching his calm but radiating authority. "You're right, preparation isn't enough, resolve is, and I'm resolved to protect my family. Step off my property, Gary. This is your last warning." He studied me, then chuckled softly, almost admiringly. "You're different than I expected." "Different enough that you won't intimidate us," I said, letting the words hang like a challenge in the cold morning air. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. The tension was so thick it felt like it could snap at any second. I knew he wanted me to act impulsively, to lose control. But I didn't. I was calm, I was prepared, I was protecting my family. Finally, after what felt like hours compressed into seconds, he stepped back just slightly. "This isn't over," he said, his tone a warning more than a threat. "You've made things complicated." I didn't respond. I just watched as he climbed back into his SUV, slowly driving away, the engine growling like a beast retreating into the shadows. When the vehicle disappeared over the hill, I finally allowed myself to exhale. My heart was still pounding, but I felt something else too, determination. Gary had tested me today and I had stood my ground, but I knew the battle wasn't over. He would come back and the stakes would only get higher. That night, I reinforced every lock again, double-checked the cameras, and made sure every possible approach to the ranch was covered. My wife and kids were safe in the house, oblivious to how close danger had come today, but I couldn't let my guard down, not for a second. Tomorrow, I realized, things would escalate even further. Gary had seen our strength and I had no doubt he would respond, but I wasn't scared, I was ready. And when the next move came, he would learn exactly what it meant to threaten my family. The next morning, I woke to a silence that felt wrong. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, it's heavy, expectant. My gut tightened as I glanced out the window. And then I saw it, tire tracks on the grass, leading straight to the edge of our property. Gary had been here again, closer than ever, testing boundaries, leaving a message without even showing himself. I immediately checked on the kids. They were safe in their room, but I felt a surge of anger and fear all at once. My wife came up behind me, her hand resting on my shoulder. "He's pushing too far," she said softly. I nodded, silently agreeing. There was no longer any room for negotiation. Gary wasn't just a nuisance, he was a threat. I grabbed my phone and documented everything: tire tracks, footprints, and the envelope he had left by the gate yesterday. Evidence matters. I didn't want this to become one of those situations where intimidation works because no one can prove it. But in that moment, evidence wasn't enough. I needed to act. By mid-morning, Gary showed up in person. This time, he didn't approach with words. He parked just outside the fence and got out, scanning the property like a hawk. I could feel my pulse hammering, but I stood my ground. My kids were inside, my wife was at the window watching, and I knew I had to be calm. "Morning," he said, almost casually, as if he weren't standing in my driveway with a threatening presence. "Gary," I said, stepping firmly in front of him, "this ends today. You are on private property. You have no right to threaten us. Leave now or law enforcement will handle it." He smirked, tilting his head. "You're brave or foolish, maybe both. You think a few cameras and locks can stop me." I took a deep breath. This isn't about locks or cameras, it's about protecting my family, and I will do whatever it takes, step off my property. For a moment, he seemed to measure me, calculating the risk. And then, without warning, he took a step closer, into the line I had drawn, my fists clenched, my heart pounded. You need to understand, he said quietly, almost whispering now, some lessons must be felt, not documented. I realized then he was getting dangerously close. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. He was testing how far I would go, and I would let him know there was a line he could not cross. I stepped forward closer than I had before, my voice low but steady. Back up, one more step and I call the sheriff. This is your final warning. He hesitated, eyes flicking to the house. I knew he had seen my kids' windows. I didn't let myself falter. My family's safety wasn't negotiable. Finally, he smirked, raising his hands like a man surrendering just slightly. You're different, I'll be back though, you haven't seen the last of me. And with that, he walked back to his SUV and drove away, leaving a silence that was almost deafening. But this time, I didn't feel relief. I felt resolve. I went inside, checking the locks and bolstering security even more. I knew the next encounter could escalate further. I also knew something important. Gary underestimated me. He thought threats alone would bend me. He thought fear could control my family. He was wrong. That night, I sat on the porch, my wife beside me, the kids asleep inside. I looked over our ranch, over every fence and gate I had fortified. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about standing firm, about showing that no one could intimidate our family. I realized something in that quiet moment. Gary might push as far as he could, but we were ready. Not just with locks, cameras, and evidence, but with determination, with resolve. And when he realized just how serious we were, the regret would be his, not ours. Tomorrow, I promised myself we would take the next step. We wouldn't just defend our ranch, we would confront the threat head-on, make sure it couldn't return. Because some lines aren't meant to be crossed, and Gary had just learned the hard way that this family didn't bend. The morning felt heavier than usual. Even the sunrise seemed cautious, as if it knew what was coming. I could feel it in every step I took across the yard, the tension in the air, the way the wind carried a warning. Gary wasn't just testing us anymore. He was escalating, and I had reached the point where waiting was no longer an option. I made sure my family was inside, the kids safe and calm, my wife tense but steady. She gave me a look that said she trusted me but also reminded me of the stakes. This wasn't just about property lines or HOA rules, it was about standing up for the people I loved most. And I was ready. I stationed myself at the porch, scanning the horizon. Minutes felt like hours until I finally saw him, Gary, coming down the driveway, flanked by two other men. My blood ran cold. He wasn't alone anymore. This wasn't just intimidation, it was a calculated show of force. He stopped a few yards from the gate, hands in his pockets, a smirk on his face. I see you've made a few adjustments, he said, eyes flicking to the cameras and reinforced fences. Clever, but cleverness only goes so far. I stepped forward, voice calm but unyielding. Gary, this ends today. You've crossed every line and I will not let you threaten my family any longer. Leave now or face the consequences. His smirk didn't falter. Consequences? Oh, I think you underestimate what I can do. I felt my pulse quicken, but I didn't flinch. I had prepared for this. I had evidence, I had legal backup on call, and I had resolve. You're threatening my family. That has a price, Gary, and I'm ready to pay it by defending them. He laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that echoed across the ranch. Bold words, let's see if you can follow through. I stepped closer, making sure he knew I was serious. My stance was firm, confident, unshakable. My heart thumped not with fear, but with determination. I warned you before, I warned you again. This is the last warning, leave my property. His eyes flicked toward the house, then back at me. For a moment I saw something flicker, hesitation. Then his smirk faltered. He realized he was no longer in control. He had tested me, pushed me, tried to intimidate, but he had underestimated one thing, the lengths I would go to protect my family. Fine, he said finally, stepping back, but his words were heavy with warning. You may have one today, but this isn't over. I didn't respond. I just stood there, my family safe behind the windows, my eyes fixed on him until he climbed back into his SUV and drove off. The engine's growl echoed like a retreating storm. I let myself exhale, but only briefly. Because I knew, finally, that I had won something far greater than just a confrontation. I had defended my family, my home, and my peace of mind. Gary had learned that threats and intimidation didn't work here, not with us. I went inside and hugged my wife and kids, feeling a surge of relief mixed with pride. We had faced fear together and come out stronger. My kids didn't fully understand the danger, they just knew Daddy had protected them, but that was enough. I spent the rest of the day documenting everything, making sure every encounter, every threat, every intimidation attempt was recorded. I wanted to be ready if Gary or anyone else tried this again, not because I wanted to escalate, but because I knew that preparation is power and power ensures safety. That night I sat on the porch again, watching the stars. The ranch was quiet, the fields stretched out, calm and serene, and for the first time in weeks I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Gary's threats had been serious and the fear was real, but we had faced it, we had won. I knew the HOA would talk, neighbors would whisper, and Gary would no doubt plot his next move. But one thing was certain, he had learned a lesson he wouldn't forget. And we had learned one too, that standing up for your family, no matter the cost, is never the wrong choice. Tomorrow would come and life would continue. But for now my ranch was safe, my family was safe, and Gary's intimidation had failed. And that finally was victory. The days after Gary's retreat felt almost unreal. The ranch, once heavy with tension, seemed to breathe again. The wind through the trees, the lowing of the cows, even the chickens wandering the yard, it all felt normal, peaceful, almost like a reward for standing firm. I spent the morning walking the perimeter again, checking cameras and locks, but this time there was no fear, only confidence. Gary had tested me, tried to intimidate my family, and in the end he had failed. I felt a quiet pride swell inside me. My wife came out to join me, holding 2 cups of coffee. She smiled softly, a mixture of relief and amusement. "You look exhausted," she said. "I am," I admitted, taking a sip. "But exhausted in a good way. We did it, we actually did it." She laughed lightly, shaking her head. "You actually turned our ranch into a fortress. The kids are going to think this is the coolest thing ever." I grinned, letting some humor cut through the lingering tension. "Yeah, secret cameras, motion sensors, reinforced gates. Maybe we should start charging admission for tour." The kids ran past, oblivious to the danger that had been lurking just days before. I bent down and ruffled their hair, feeling a surge of love and protectiveness. They didn't understand everything that had happened, but they could feel the calm and safety surrounding them now. I realized then something important. This wasn't just about a battle with an overbearing HOA member. It was about showing my family, and maybe even myself, that intimidation doesn't win. Courage does, preparation does, standing your ground does. Over the next few days, I kept documenting everything, sending copies of the letters and encounters to my attorney. I wanted a record, a safety net in case Gary tried any more underhanded tactics. Knowledge and proof, these were weapons just as important as fences and cameras. Neighbors began to notice the change too. Some offered quiet congratulations, others just nodded, probably recalling the tension that had gripped the ranch. I didn't need their validation. The real victory was right here, in the smiles of my family and the security of our home. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of Gary's SUV slowly driving past the entrance, as if he was checking if I'd let my guard down. I stood on the porch, hands on my hips, and waved casually. A small smirk played on my lips. Let him see it, he couldn't intimidate us anymore. Not with threats, not with letters, not with the pretense of authority. Life returned to a slower, calmer pace. My wife and I laughed more freely, the kids played without fear, and the ranch seemed to hum with a quiet energy. Even the fences and cameras, which had once symbolized tension and preparation for battle, now felt like guardians, silent but vigilant. I took a moment one evening to sit on the porch, staring out at the horizon. The sky was painted with colors that reminded me of why we built this life here in the first place. A place of peace, of freedom, of family, and now more than ever I understood the price of protecting it. Gary's threats had been real and the fear had been palpable, but in the end we had faced it together. My family and I had stood firm, unshaken, and in doing so we had won something more than just safety. We had won respect from ourselves, from each other, and even, perhaps begrudgingly, from Gary. As the stars appeared overhead, I felt a smile tug at the corners of my lips. We had survived the intimidation, defended our home, and come out stronger. And if Gary ever thought he could test us again, he would soon learn that this family didn't bend. We may live in a neighborhood governed by rules and HOA bylaws, but some things, family, courage, and the will to protect what's yours, are above any regulation. And that was a lesson Gary and anyone else who ever tried to threaten us would never forget. I stood up, taking one last look at the ranch, the home that had been our battlefield and our sanctuary. I knew challenges might come again, life always has a way of testing you, but for now we had peace. And after all we'd faced, that peace felt earned. Because sometimes, victory isn't just about winning a battle. It's about proving to yourself and everyone around you that you will never let fear control your family. And on this ranch, on this land, under these stars, I knew we had won. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.